My name is Sadie. I'm 35 years old, and I'm sitting here in my own apartment for the first time in 8 years. The walls are painted a soft yellow that I chose myself, and my 8-year-old daughter Emma is sleeping peacefully in her room down the hall. Just this morning, my lawyer called with news that changed everything. The papers are finally signed. After 3 years of legal battles, restraining orders, and court hearings that felt like they would never end, I'm officially free. 3 years ago, my ex-husband told me I would never survive without him. He said I was too weak, too dependent, too broken to make it on my own. Today, I proved him wrong in ways he never saw coming. Before I share this journey with you, I'd love to know where you're watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button if you believe in second chances and the power of fighting for your freedom, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story has a twist that changed everything for me and Emma. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. Let me take you back to where it all started. I was 27 when I first met Jonathan at the law firm, where I worked as a marketing coordinator. He was 35, a successful attorney with perfectly styled dark hair and a smile that could light up any room. I was young, ambitious, and completely independent. I had my own apartment, my own car, and dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. Those first few months felt like a fairy tale. Jonathan would surprise me with bouquets of red roses delivered to my office, making all my coworkers jealous. He took me to the most expensive restaurants in the city, where he would order wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Our weekend getaways to his cabin in the mountains felt like scenes from a romantic movie. He made me feel like I was the most important person in his world. The proposal came after 10 months of dating. It was a crisp October evening, and he had planned this elaborate setup on the rooftop of our favorite restaurant. There were candles everywhere, string lights twinkling above us, and a view of the entire city skyline. When he got down on one knee and pulled out that 2-carat diamond ring, I thought I was living in a dream. The ring caught the light from every angle, sparkling like something you would see in a jewelry store window. I said yes without hesitation, tears streaming down my face as he slipped it onto my finger. But looking back now, I can see the warning signs were there from the very beginning. About 2 weeks after we got engaged, Jonathan started making little comments about my appearance. He would suggest that maybe I should wear dresses more often instead of my usual work pants. He said it would make me look more feminine and professional. At first, I thought he was just trying to help me succeed at work. Then he started commenting on my friendships. My best friend Lisa had been in my life since college, and we talked almost every day. Jonathan began saying things like, "She seems a little jealous of our relationship, don't you think?" Or, "I don't think she's the best influence on your career growth." When Lisa would invite me out for our weekly coffee dates, Jonathan would suggest we spend that time together instead, planning our wedding or looking at houses. Slowly, I started declining Lisa's invitations. I told myself it was because I was busy with wedding planning, but deep down, I was beginning to believe that maybe Jonathan was right. Maybe Lisa was holding me back from becoming the woman I was supposed to be. The pressure about my job started subtly too. Jonathan would mention how stressful my work seemed to make me, how late I was staying at the office, how tired I looked when I came home. He would say things like, "When we're married, you won't have to worry about all this stress. My income is more than enough to support both of us." He made it sound like he was offering me freedom from the daily grind, a chance to focus on our relationship and our future family. Our wedding was everything a girl could dream of. 200 guests filled the ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. My dress was a custom design that cost more than I made in 6 months, and the reception had an open bar with top-shelf liquor and a 5-course meal prepared by a celebrity chef. But as I look back on that day, I realized that almost every guest was someone from Jonathan's world. His colleagues, his family, his law school friends. Somehow, most of the people who mattered to me hadn't made it to the final guest list. The honeymoon in Hawaii should have been the most romantic 2 weeks of our lives. Jonathan had booked us into a luxury resort with an ocean view suite and access to private beaches. But even there, I started to notice how he managed every detail of our schedule. He had researched and planned every restaurant, every activity, every moment of our days. When I suggested we just spend one afternoon exploring on our own, maybe finding a local food truck or a hidden beach, he looked at me like I had suggested something completely unreasonable. "I've spent months planning this trip to be perfect," he said. "Why would we risk ruining it with random choices?" When we returned from our honeymoon and moved into Jonathan's house, he explained that we needed to establish some ground rules for our new life together. The house was beautiful, a colonial-style home with a perfectly manicured lawn and an interior that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. But it had been his space for so long that I felt like a guest who was never quite sure where anything belonged. He suggested that I quit my job at the marketing firm. Just temporarily, he assured me. Until we get pregnant and start our family, it doesn't make sense for you to be stressed about work when we're trying to conceive. When I hesitated mentioning that I loved my career and had worked so hard to get where I was, he wrapped his arms around me and said, "I make enough money for both of us. Don't you want to focus on being the best wife and future mother you can be?" The financial changes happened gradually. First, Jonathan suggested we combine our bank accounts to make managing household expenses easier. It seemed logical since we were married and planning a future together. But soon I realized that while our accounts were technically joint, Jonathan monitored every transaction. If I bought coffee with a friend or picked up a book at the bookstore, he would ask detailed questions about why I needed those things and whether they were the best use of our money. When I brought up maybe getting a part-time job just to stay connected to the working world, Jonathan's response was swift and firm. "People will think I can't provide for my wife," he said. "It reflects poorly on both of us. Besides, you should be focusing your energy on getting pregnant, not dealing with office politics and deadlines." I found out I was expecting Emma 6 months after we got married. Jonathan was overjoyed, immediately calling his parents and several colleagues to share the news. But with the pregnancy came an even more intense level of control over every aspect of my life. He researched and chose my obstetrician without consulting me, saying he wanted to make sure I had the best care possible. He monitored my diet, obsessively removing foods from our kitchen that he had read might be harmful during pregnancy. When my mother wanted to throw me a baby shower, Jonathan insisted on planning it himself. He said my mother's ideas were too traditional and outdated, and he wanted our child's celebration to reflect our modern lifestyle. The shower ended up being held at his country club with guests primarily from his social circle. My childhood friends and family members seemed out of place among his colleagues' wives, and I spent most of the afternoon feeling like I was playing a role rather than celebrating my own pregnancy. Emma was born on a snowy December morning after 14 hours of labor. She was perfect with tiny fingers and the most beautiful dark eyes I had ever seen. But even in those first precious weeks of motherhood, Jonathan's control intensified rather than softened. He had strong opinions about everything from how I should breastfeed to how long I should hold her when she cried. "You're spoiling her," he would say if I picked Emma up too quickly when she fussed. "She needs to learn independence from the beginning." If I questioned his approach or suggested maybe we should ask the pediatrician about different methods, he would remind me that he had done extensive research and that his way was backed by the latest parenting science. As Emma grew from an infant into a toddler, Jonathan's control over our lives became a carefully constructed prison that I didn't even fully recognize at the time. Every aspect of our daily routine required his approval, and any deviation from his expectations was met with long lectures about responsibility and proper family management. The financial control became more sophisticated and restricting. Instead of access to our joint accounts, Jonathan gave me a weekly allowance of $50 for personal expenses. This had to cover everything from my shampoo and makeup to any small treats I might want to buy for Emma. If I needed anything beyond that amount, I had to present a detailed case for why it was necessary. I remember standing in the pharmacy once calculating whether I could afford both the children's vitamins Emma needed and the face cream I had been using, and realizing I could only choose one. All of our credit cards were in Jonathan's name only. He explained this was for security reasons and to maintain our excellent credit score, but it meant that I couldn't make any purchase without his knowledge and approval. If I wanted to buy Emma a new toy or take her to a children's museum, I had to ask permission like a child asking for allowance money. The social isolation was perhaps the most devastating part of this period. Jonathan had convinced me to stop using social media entirely, saying it was a waste of time that would be better spent focusing on our family. He would check my phone regularly, reading through my text messages and questioning me about any calls I had received during the day. If one of my old friends tried to reach out, he would suggest that maybe they were just being nosy or trying to create drama in our marriage. My mother lived only an hour away, but visits became increasingly rare and stressful. Jonathan would find reasons why she couldn't come over, saying the house wasn't clean enough or that Emma needed to stick to her nap schedule. When I suggested visiting her instead, he would remind me of all the things that needed to be done at home or mention that Emma traveled better when she was older. The few neighbors who tried to be friendly were quickly dismissed. When Mrs. Peterson from next door brought over cookies and tried to chat about our gardens, Jonathan later told me she seemed like the type who would spread gossip around the neighborhood. "We need to be careful about what kind of people we let into our private life," he would say. "Not everyone has good intentions." When Emma started showing signs of normal toddler independence, wanting to feed herself or choose her own clothes, Jonathan saw these as problems that needed to be corrected, rather than developmental milestones to celebrate. "She's becoming defiant because you're too permissive with her," he would tell me. Children need structure and clear boundaries, not chaos and emotional decisions. If I tried to defend Emma's behavior or suggest that maybe she was just growing up and learning to express herself, Jonathan would turn that criticism toward me. "This is what happens when mothers don't have enough life experience," he would say. "You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment about what's best for our daughter." The psychological manipulation during this time was constant and exhausting. Jonathan had a way of making me question my own perceptions and instincts about everything. When I would express concern about Emma's development or suggest that maybe she needed more social interaction with other children, he would cite articles he had read or mention conversations he had had with his colleagues who were also parents. Dr. Williams at the firm says his wife made the mistake of rushing their daughter into too many social situations, and now she's anxious and clingy, he would say. "We don't want to make those same errors with Emma." I found myself constantly second-guessing my maternal instincts, wondering if my desire to take Emma to story time at the library or set up play dates with other children was somehow harmful to her development. The breaking point came on a cold February night when Emma was 6 years old. She had been fighting a fever for 2 days, and despite my growing concern, Jonathan insisted that children her age commonly got sick and that we just needed to let her immune system handle the situation naturally. That evening, Emma's temperature spiked to 103 degrees. She was lethargic, barely responding when I called her name, and her breathing seemed labored. Every maternal instinct I had was screaming that something was seriously wrong, but when I told Jonathan I thought we should take her to the emergency room, his response was immediate and dismissive. "You're being overly dramatic," he said, not even looking up from his laptop where he was reviewing case files. "Children get fevers all the time. The last thing we need is to spend our entire night in a crowded emergency room where she'll just be exposed to more germs, only to have some doctor tell us to give her fluids and let her rest." I stood there holding my burning, barely conscious daughter, and something inside me finally snapped. For the first time in years, I made a decision without his permission. I picked up my phone and dialed 911, telling the dispatcher that I had a 6-year-old with a high fever who needed immediate medical attention. Jonathan's fury was immediate and explosive. He grabbed the phone from my hand and tried to cancel the ambulance, but it was too late. When the paramedics arrived 12 minutes later, Emma's temperature had risen to 104 degrees, and they immediately began preparing her for transport to the children's hospital. At the hospital, the doctors quickly determined that Emma had developed pneumonia and her condition was serious enough to require immediate admission and intravenous antibiotics. The emergency room physician explained that if we had waited even a few more hours to bring her in, she could have developed life-threatening complications. Throughout Emma's 3-day hospital stay, Jonathan played the role of the concerned, devoted father perfectly. He brought flowers for the nurses, thanked the doctors profusely, and made sure everyone knew how grateful he was for their excellent care. To anyone watching, he looked like a loving husband and father who was simply worried about his child's health. But when we were alone in Emma's hospital room, his mask would slip completely. He blamed me for overreacting and creating unnecessary drama, saying that Emma probably would have recovered just fine at home with proper rest. "Now we're going to have massive medical bills because you couldn't control your anxiety," he whispered harshly while Emma slept. This is exactly the kind of poor decision-making that proves you're not capable of handling real emergencies. The night we brought Emma home from the hospital, Jonathan's rage reached a level I had never experienced before. He systematically went through our bedroom, throwing all of my personal belongings into garbage bags. Photo albums from my childhood jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, books I had collected over the years. Clothes I had bought before our marriage, everything that represented my life before him was deemed worthless and unnecessary. "You don't deserve anything I've provided for you," he said as he carried bag after bag to the front porch. "You've proven that you can't make rational decisions about our family, and now you need to face the consequences of your actions." When I tried to save a few items that had sentimental value, he physically blocked me from the bedroom, saying I had lost the right to own anything in his house. The final humiliation came when he locked me out of the house entirely, leaving me standing in the cold February rain while Emma called for me from her bedroom window upstairs. I could hear my daughter crying and asking why Mommy was outside, but Jonathan wouldn't let her come downstairs or allow me back inside. I spent that night sitting in my car in our driveway, soaked through and shivering, finally understanding the full extent of what my life had become. For the first time in years, I saw the situation clearly, without the fog of manipulation and gaslighting that had clouded my judgment for so long. At 3 a.m, I called the domestic violence hotline that I found through a quick internet search on my phone. The counselor who answered was named Maria, and she listened to my story with patience and understanding that I hadn't experienced in years. She helped me recognize that what I was experiencing wasn't just an unhappy marriage or normal marital problems, but a systematic pattern of abuse designed to control every aspect of my life. Financial abuse, social isolation, emotional manipulation, and threats involving your child are all serious forms of domestic violence, Maria explained gently. You're not overreacting and you're not crazy. What you're describing is a textbook case of coercive control, and you have every right to seek help and protection for yourself and your daughter. That phone call was the first time in 7 years that someone had validated my feelings and confirmed that my perceptions of my own life were accurate. I wasn't too sensitive or too emotional or incapable of making good decisions. I was a woman who had been systematically broken down by someone who claimed to love me, and it was time to start fighting back. The next 6 months were spent in careful, methodical planning. I knew that leaving Jonathan wouldn't be as simple as packing a bag and walking out the door. He was a successful attorney with connections throughout the legal community, significant financial resources, and a reputation that would give him advantages in any custody battle. If I was going to leave him and protect Emma, I needed to be strategic and patient. Maria connected me with a local organization that provided support and resources for women leaving abusive relationships. Through them, I learned about the importance of documentation, legal preparation, and safety planning. I started keeping a hidden journal where I recorded Jonathan's controlling behaviors, verbal threats, and incidents of emotional abuse. I learned to take photos of any physical evidence like the bags of my belongings he had thrown away using timestamps to create a clear record of his actions. The most challenging part was learning to hide my activities from someone who monitored every aspect of my life. I couldn't use our home computer or my regular phone to research divorce lawyers or domestic violence resources, since Jonathan checked our internet history regularly. Instead, I started going to the public library when I told him I was taking Emma to the park. While she played in the children's area, I would use the library's computers to research legal options and send encrypted emails to potential attorneys. 3 weeks after the hospital incident, I had an unexpected encounter that changed everything. While grocery shopping at our usual supermarket, I ran into Lisa, my best friend from before my marriage. It had been almost 4 years since we had spoken, and seeing her familiar face in the cereal aisle made me realize how isolated I had become. Lisa took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I had lost significant weight over the years of stress and constant criticism, and I could see the concern in her eyes as she took in my appearance. When she suggested we grab coffee and catch up, I automatically started to decline, but something in her expression made me pause. 5 minutes, I said, glancing around to make sure Jonathan wasn't anywhere nearby. Emma and I can sit with you in the store cafe for just a few minutes. Those 5 minutes in the grocery store cafe became the most important conversation of my adult life. When Lisa asked how I was doing, years of suppressed honesty came pouring out. I told her about the financial control, the isolation, the constant criticism, and the way Jonathan used Emma as leverage to keep me compliant. Lisa listened without judgment, and when I finished explaining my situation, she pulled out her phone and saved a contact number for me. My cousin went through something similar 5 years ago, she said quietly, making sure Emma couldn't hear our conversation. This is her divorce attorney's number. Sarah Henderson specializes in cases involving financial abuse and custody disputes with controlling spouses. Call her Sadie. You deserve so much better than this. Getting that phone number felt like being handed a lifeline. That afternoon, while Jonathan was at work and Emma was napping, I called Sarah Henderson's office from the library and scheduled a consultation for the following week. Meeting with Sarah was the first time I had spoken openly about my marriage with someone who understood the legal implications of everything Jonathan had done. She explained that his financial control constituted economic abuse, that his threats regarding custody were designed to intimidate me, and that his pattern of isolation and emotional manipulation would be relevant factors in both divorce and custody proceedings. The good news is that courts are becoming much more aware of coercive control and financial abuse, Sarah explained during our first meeting. The bad news is that your husband is an attorney, which means he'll know exactly how to present himself in the best possible light and he'll have resources to fight this battle. We need to be prepared for a long, difficult process, but I believe we can get you and your daughter to safety. Preparing financially for independence was perhaps the most challenging aspect of my planning. I had been out of the workforce for over 6 years, and my resume had a significant gap that would be difficult to explain to potential employers. However, I discovered that I could do some freelance writing work online, creating content for small businesses and blogs that paid directly to a checking account Jonathan didn't know existed. I opened the secret account at a bank across town using my maiden name and the address of a mailbox rental service. Every week, I would deposit small amounts of cash that I saved from my household allowance, along with the modest payments from my writing work. It took months to accumulate even a few $100s, but having any money of my own felt like reclaiming a piece of my identity. The most heartbreaking part of the planning process was preparing Emma for changes she couldn't fully understand. At 6 years old, she knew that mommy and daddy sometimes argued, but she had no context for understanding that our family situation was abnormal. I started having gentle conversations with her about how sometimes families have to make changes to be safer and happier, and that no matter what happened, both mommy and daddy would always love her. I also had to coordinate with Emma's school about the possibility of custody changes and legal proceedings. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had always been kind and supportive, and when I explained our situation in general terms, she assured me that the school would cooperate with any court orders and would prioritize Emma's emotional well-being throughout the process. By early September, I had gathered significant documentation of Jonathan's controlling behavior, saved nearly $800 in my secret account, and established relationships with the legal and support services I would need. Sarah had helped me prepare a comprehensive safety plan that included temporary housing at a local safe house, a detailed timeline for serving Jonathan with divorce papers, and strategies for protecting Emma during the initial phase of our separation. The plan was to leave on a Thursday morning in late September, when Jonathan would be out of town for a 3-day legal conference in Seattle. This would give us a head start and allow me to get the necessary legal documents filed before he returned and realized what was happening. Thursday, September 28th, became the most important day of my adult life. Jonathan left for Seattle at 6 in the morning, kissing Emma goodbye, and reminding me that he would be checking in regularly and expected detailed updates about our activities while he was gone. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I began executing the plan that I had rehearsed mentally hundreds of times over the previous months. Emma and I had already packed essential items in 2 small suitcases that I kept hidden in the back of her closet. I had copies of all important documents, including Emma's birth certificate, medical records, and school information stored in a folder that I could grab quickly. The hardest part was trying to maintain normalcy for Emma, while my heart was racing with anxiety and determination. I made her favorite breakfast and helped her get ready for school just like any other day, but instead of walking her to the bus stop, I told her we were going to take a special trip together. "Where are we going, Mommy?" she asked as I buckled her into her car seat, holding her favorite stuffed elephant that she took everywhere. "We're going to stay with some very nice people for a little while," I told her, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "It's going to be a new adventure for both of us, and I'll be with you the whole time." Before we left the house, I placed the divorce papers and restraining order request on Jonathan's desk, where he would see them immediately upon his return. Sarah had prepared everything, meticulously documenting years of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and threats involving Emma's custody. The restraining order would prevent Jonathan from coming to our temporary housing location and would give us legal protection during the initial phase of the separation. The safe house was located in a different county about 40 minutes away from our neighborhood. It was a large older home that had been converted to provide temporary housing for women and children leaving domestic violence situations. The staff was incredibly kind and experienced, and they had prepared a room for Emma and me that felt as welcoming as they could make it under the circumstances. Emma adapted to our new environment better than I had hoped. There were other children at the safe house, and she quickly made friends with a little girl named Sophie, whose mother was also escaping an abusive relationship. Having other children around made the transition feel less scary and more like an extended sleepover from her perspective. My phone started ringing at 11:30 that evening. Jonathan had returned from Seattle early and found the papers I had left for him. His voicemails progressed from confusion to anger to outright threats over the course of several hours. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," he said in one message. "I will destroy you in court, take Emma away from you permanently, and make sure you end up with absolutely nothing. You have no idea what you've just started." Sarah had warned me that this reaction was typical, and that I should document every threatening phone call and voicemail without responding to any of them directly. Jonathan's rage and need for control would make him his own worst enemy if I could resist the urge to engage with his manipulation tactics. The legal battle began in earnest the following Monday, when Jonathan filed a counter-petition claiming that I had kidnapped Emma and was mentally unstable. He painted himself as a loving, concerned father whose wife had suddenly and inexplicably left home, with their daughter putting the child in an unknown and potentially dangerous situation. His attorney was Marcus Webb, one of the most expensive and ruthless divorce lawyers in the city. Webb specialized in representing high-net-worth individuals in contentious custody battles, and he immediately began a campaign to portray me as an unfit mother who had abandoned her family responsibilities. The first court hearing was scheduled for October 15th, and I was terrified about facing Jonathan in a legal setting where he would have every advantage. He knew the law, he knew the local judges, and he had unlimited resources to wage this battle. I was a woman who had been out of the workforce for 6 years, had limited financial resources, and was depending on a public defender and a legal aid attorney to protect my daughter and myself. But Sarah Henderson proved to be everything Lisa had promised, and more. She had extensive experience with cases involving coercive control and financial abuse, and she understood exactly how men like Jonathan operated in legal settings. During our preparation sessions, she taught me how to recognize his manipulation tactics and how to respond to questions in ways that would expose his controlling behavior, rather than making me look unstable or vindictive. The first few court hearings were brutal experiences that tested every bit of strength I had developed over the previous months. Jonathan presented himself as the perfect husband and father, wearing his most expensive suits and speaking in the measured professional tone that had served him so well throughout his legal career. To anyone who didn't know the truth, he looked like a successful attorney who was devastated by his wife's unexpected and irrational decision to leave their marriage and take their daughter away from her stable home environment. He spoke about his commitment to family values, his financial ability to provide for Emma's future education and opportunities, and his deep concern about the trauma that this separation was causing their daughter. Webb had prepared a compelling narrative that painted me as an unstable woman who had been influenced by radical feminist ideas about domestic abuse and had convinced herself that her caring, successful husband was somehow dangerous. They presented my decision to leave as evidence of poor judgment and claimed that I was putting Emma at risk by exposing her to the unpredictable environment of a domestic violence shelter. During those early hearings, I felt like I was drowning in legal language and procedures that I didn't fully understand. Every time I tried to explain Jonathan's controlling behavior, Webb would object or redirect the conversation back to my supposed mental health issues and abandonment of family responsibilities. But Sarah was methodically building our case, piece by piece, documented incident by documented incident. She had subpoenaed our financial records and was able to demonstrate the extreme level of control Jonathan had exercised over every aspect of our household spending. The fact that I had been given a $50 weekly allowance while Jonathan spent thousands of dollars on business entertainment and personal luxuries painted a clear picture of financial abuse. The real breakthrough came when Sarah's private investigator discovered that Jonathan's pattern of controlling behavior extended far beyond our marriage. Through careful research of public records and discreet interviews with former colleagues, we learned that Jonathan's first wife, Rachel Morrison, had divorced him 8 years earlier under similar circumstances. Rachel had been granted a restraining order during their divorce proceedings, but the details had been sealed by the court at the time. However, the investigator was able to make contact with Rachel, who was now remarried and living in another state. After years of silence, she was willing to speak about her experiences with Jonathan and to provide testimony about his behavioral patterns. During a phone call that changed everything, Rachel told me that Jonathan's controlling behavior had escalated over the course of their 3-year marriage until she had been completely isolated from her family and friends. He convinced me that everyone in my life was trying to undermine our relationship, she explained. By the time I realized what was happening, I had no job, no money, and no support system. The only reason I was able to leave was because my sisters secretly helped me find a lawyer and a place to stay. Rachel's willingness to testify about Jonathan's history of coercive control gave our case the credibility that had been missing during the early hearings. Sarah was able to demonstrate that Jonathan's behavior with me wasn't an isolated incident or a result of marital problems, but rather a consistent pattern of abuse that he had used to control both of his wives. The turning point came during a hearing in late November when Webb made the strategic error of putting Jonathan on the witness stand to testify about his parenting philosophy and commitment to Emma's well-being. Sarah's cross-examination was masterful calmly and methodically, walking Jonathan through specific incidents that revealed his need for absolute control over every aspect of family life. When she asked him to explain why he had prevented me from taking Emma to the emergency room when she had pneumonia, Jonathan's carefully constructed facade began to crack. He insisted that he had only been trying to protect Emma from unnecessary medical intervention and that my reaction had been hysterical and overblown. So you believe that a mother's concern about her child's 104-degree fever constitutes hysteria? Sarah asked calmly. I believe that parents need to make rational, informed decisions rather than emotional ones. Jonathan replied, his voice taking on the condescending tone that I had heard so many times during our marriage. And you felt qualified to make that medical determination despite having no medical training. I researched the situation thoroughly and consulted several reliable sources about childhood fever management. He said, his irritation starting to show. But you didn't consult your child's pediatrician or any actual medical professional. That seemed premature given the circumstances. Sarah continued this line of questioning until Jonathan's true nature was fully exposed to the courtroom. His need to be the ultimate authority on every decision, his dismissal of my maternal instincts, and his willingness to risk Emma's health rather than admit he might be wrong, painted a clear picture of a man whose need for control superseded his daughter's well-being. The final blow came when Sarah played the audio recordings I had made of Jonathan's verbal abuse and threats. Hearing his voice raised in anger and filled with contempt as he told me I was worthless and would never be capable of surviving without him was devastating evidence that no amount of courtroom polish could overcome. You're nothing without me. His recorded voice echoed through the courtroom, the same words he had screamed at me countless times during our marriage. I'll make sure you lose everything, including Emma, if you ever try to leave me. The transformation in the courtroom atmosphere was immediate and profound. Judge Morrison, who had initially seemed sympathetic to Jonathan's presentation as the wronged husband, now looked at him with obvious disgust. The court stenographer stopped typing for a moment, clearly affected by what she was hearing. Even Webb seemed to realize that his client had just destroyed any remaining credibility he might have had. The final custody and divorce hearing took place on a gray December morning, almost exactly 1 year after Emma's pneumonia had first opened my eyes to the reality of my situation. I had been living at the safe house for 3 months, had started working part-time at a marketing agency that specialized in helping small businesses, and had begun to rebuild my sense of self-worth through counseling and support groups. Emma was thriving in her new school and had adjusted remarkably well to our changed circumstances. She was more outgoing, more confident, and more willing to express her own opinions and preferences than she had ever been while living under Jonathan's strict control. The child psychologist who had evaluated her for the court reported that she showed no signs of trauma from our separation and seemed to be flourishing in an environment where she was allowed more autonomy and emotional expression. When Judge Morrison called our case that morning, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination that had sustained me throughout this entire battle. Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly as we stood to hear the court's final decision on custody support and division of assets. After careful consideration of all testimony evidence and expert evaluations presented in this case, Judge Morrison began, this court finds that the petitioner, Sadie Johnson, has demonstrated by clear and convincing evidence that she has been the victim of systematic emotional abuse, financial control, and coercive behavior designed to isolate her from support systems and make her dependent on the respondent. I could hear Jonathan's sharp intake of breath from across the courtroom, but I kept my eyes focused on the judge as she continued. The court is particularly concerned by the respondent's documented history of similar controlling behavior with his previous spouse, his willingness to jeopardize his child's medical care to maintain authority over family decisions and his complete lack of insight into the harmful effects of his actions on both his wife and daughter. Judge Morrison went on to award me primary physical custody of Emma, with Jonathan granted only supervised visitation until he completed a year of counseling focused on domestic violence and anger management. The financial settlement was more generous than I had ever hoped for, with the court recognizing that Jonathan's control over our finances constituted economic abuse that had prevented me from building career and retirement security during our marriage. I was awarded 60% of our marital assets, including half the value of the house and Jonathan's retirement accounts, along with substantial monthly child support and alimony designed to help me reestablish my financial independence. The restraining order was extended for 5 years, preventing Jonathan from contacting me directly, except through our attorneys regarding visitation with Emma. When Webb requested that Jonathan be allowed to make a statement to the court, Judge Morrison's response was swift and final. Johnson has had ample opportunity to present his case, and this court has heard quite enough of his justifications for behavior that has no place in a healthy family relationship. The orders I have issued today are final and non-negotiable. As we left the courthouse that afternoon, I felt a sense of freedom and possibility that I hadn't experienced since before I met Jonathan. Emma skipped beside me, chattering excitedly about the pizza dinner I had promised her to celebrate, completely unaware of the legal significance of what had just transpired, but sensing that something important and positive had happened. Jonathan's attempt to appeal the custody decision was unsuccessful, and his supervised visits with Emma gradually became less frequent as he struggled to adapt to a relationship with his daughter that didn't involve controlling every aspect of her environment and activities. Emma began to see him for who he really was, a man whose love was conditional on absolute obedience, and whose approval came with strings attached that were too heavy for a child to carry. Today, as I sit in the living room of the apartment that Emma and I chose together, I can honestly say that the woman who was locked out of her own house in the rain 3 years ago feels like someone I used to know but am no longer. Emma is now 8 years old, confident, creative, and completely free to be exactly who she is, without fear of criticism or control. We moved into this apartment 6 months ago, and every detail reflects choices that we made together. Emma picked the sunny yellow paint for the living room because it reminds her of happiness, and she helped me choose the comfortable furniture where we read books together every evening. Our refrigerator is covered with her artwork pictures from school field trips and reminders of the activities and friendships that fill our busy, wonderful life. I returned to work in marketing and have been promoted twice in the past 18 months. My colleagues respect my ideas and contributions, and I'm building the career that I had put aside so many years ago. The financial independence I've gained isn't just about the money, though. That security is incredibly important. It's about knowing that I can provide for my daughter and myself, make decisions about our future, and build the life we want without asking permission from anyone. The healing process has been gradual but profound. Therapy helped me understand how I had lost myself in a relationship that demanded I become smaller and smaller until there was almost nothing left of who I used to be. Support groups connected me with other women who had experienced similar situations, and their stories of recovery and strength inspired me during my darkest moments of doubt. Emma and I have rebuilt our relationship with my mother, who cried with joy the first time we visited her after leaving Jonathan. She had known something was wrong during those years of isolation, but she hadn't known how to help me see what was happening or how to reach me through the walls of control that surrounded our family. Lisa and I have renewed our friendship, and she often tells me how proud she is of the courage it took to rebuild my life from nothing. "You always had this strength," she says. "Jonathan just convinced you to hide it, but it was always there waiting for the right moment to emerge." Learning to trust my own judgment again was perhaps the most challenging part of this journey. After years of being told that my instincts were wrong, my emotions were excessive, and my decisions were poor, I had to slowly rebuild confidence in my ability to navigate life independently. Every small success, from choosing our apartment to managing our budget to making decisions about Emma's education and activities, has helped me remember that I am capable of creating a good life for both of us. Emma's relationship with her father remains complicated, but she is developing her own understanding of his limitations and learning to protect herself from his attempts to control or manipulate her emotions. During their supervised visits, she has learned to set boundaries and to speak up when something makes her uncomfortable. The confidence she has gained from watching me fight for our freedom has made her stronger and more resilient than she ever could have been in an environment where questioning authority was forbidden. The most unexpected gift of this entire experience has been discovering a sense of purpose that extends beyond my own healing. I now volunteer with the same organization that helped me escape, providing support and practical assistance to other women who are beginning their own journeys toward freedom. There is something incredibly powerful about being able to tell another woman, "I understand exactly what you're going through, and I'm here to tell you that escape is possible and life on the other side is beautiful." Some people have asked me if I regret the years I spent with Jonathan, if I feel bitter about the time I lost, or the opportunities I missed while I was trapped in that controlling relationship. The truth is that while I wouldn't choose to go through that experience again, I can't regret the path that led me to where I am today. Those difficult years taught me things about strength, resilience, and the preciousness of freedom that I might never have learned otherwise. Looking back, I can see that the woman who married Jonathan was young and trusting, but she wasn't weak. She was someone who believed in love and commitment, and who was willing to give everything for what she thought was a partnership. The fact that Jonathan took advantage of those qualities doesn't make them flaws or mistakes on my part. Sometimes the person you're fighting isn't your enemy. It's the version of yourself that believes you're not strong enough to win. For too many years, I accepted Jonathan's definition of who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The real victory wasn't just leaving him or winning in court. It was remembering who I had always been, underneath all those layers of doubt and control. 3 years ago, Jonathan told me I would never survive without him. He was wrong about that, but more importantly, I was wrong to believe him. Today, I know that not only can I survive without him, I can thrive, build a career, raise an amazing daughter, and create a life filled with authentic relationships and genuine happiness. The freedom I fought for wasn't just legal or financial. It was the freedom to be myself again, and that is a gift that no one can ever take away. What I want every woman in a similar situation to know is that the strength you need already exists inside you. It might be hidden under years of criticism and control, but it's there waiting for you to remember it. The first step toward freedom is often the hardest one, but every step after that brings you closer to the life you deserve. You are worth fighting for, your children are worth protecting, and the future you dream of is absolutely possible if you're willing to take that first brave step toward claiming it. What would you do if you found yourself in a situation like mine? Have you ever had to find the courage to completely rebuild your life? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with anyone who might need to hear that escape and healing are possible. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, recovery, and the incredible strength that emerges when we refuse to accept less than we deserve. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that no matter what you're facing today, you have more power than you know to change your tomorrow. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in your own worth.